Time of the World. I'm Ginny Batchelor. This week's top story is about President Carter's decision to take tough measures against Iran by severing both diplomatic and economic relations with that country. It came as a surprise to U.S. officials. Monday, President Carter ordered all Iranian diplomats out of the U.S. and banned any further trade with Iran because of what he called a lack of progress in the hostage crisis. For weeks, Iranian President Bani Sadr has promised the U.S. and the American hostages would soon be taken from the embassy and turned over to the Iranian government. But the situation remains the same, and now President Carter says he is not willing to wait any longer. If the hostages aren't released soon, White House officials say the U.S. will take stronger measures which may include military force. Meanwhile, the militants have responded to Carter's threats with threats of their own. They say they will kill the hostages if any military action is taken against Iran.
150 years ago this week, April 6, 1830, the Mormon Church was founded. Today, there are over 4.5 million Mormons all over the world.
A nursery full of sleeping Israeli children was the target for 5 Palestinian terrorists early Monday morning. The terrorists attacked the nursery in a kibbutz on the Israeli-Lebanese border, killing a baby and 2 adults. A kibbutz is a small agricultural community in Israel. After the shooting, the Palestinians held 6 young children and 1 adult as hostages, demanding a plane to fly them to freedom. They also demanded the release of 50 Palestinian prisoners. The siege lasted 9 hours until Israeli troops stormed the nursery and killed all 5 terrorists. The raid took place on the same day Egyptian President Anwar Sadat left for the U.S. to continue negotiations on the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. Most Palestinians opposed the proposed terms of that treaty. In other foreign news, thousands of Cubans have jammed into the Peruvian embassy in Cuba, hoping to leave that country. Many Cubans are not happy with the communist dictatorship of Fidel Castro. The Peruvian government says it can't take all the Cubans who want to leave, but the United States has offered to let some of the Cubans come here. Peru is appealing to other South American countries for additional help. In Bogota, Colombia, 3 more hostages have been released by militants occupying the Dominican Republic's embassy. The militants won't release the 20 other hostages, including the U.S. ambassador, until the government releases 28 political prisoners. Negotiations between the militants and the Colombian government are continuing. A cloud of deadly gas invaded a city outside of Boston last Thursday, sending 120 persons to nearby hospitals and forcing as many as 20,000 to leave their homes. The fumes escaped from a chemical tanker car when another train crashed into it. The deadly white cloud covered dozens of city blocks for several hours before the wind blew it away. The residents said the chemical was like ammonia, and they had to cover their noses and mouths to keep from choking. As we mentioned earlier in this week's World History, while Christians all over the world were celebrating Easter, the members of the Mormon Church had a special celebration. Sunday marks the 150th anniversary of the Mormon Church, and in honor of the day, their president dedicated a meeting house in a small New York town where the first Mormons met in 1830. The Mormons are also called Latter-day Saints. Sunday's dedication was televised so Mormons around the world could watch it. In Salt Lake City, Utah, the church's headquarters, 6,000 worshipers watched on 20-foot screens, and as the service ended, the famous Mormon Tabernacle Choir began a hymn.
Now it's time for our first pop quiz. In our story on the Palestinian attack, we told you they took over a nursery on a small Israeli settlement. This type of Israeli community is called a moshav, kibbutz, commune. And the correct answer is number 2, a kibbutz.
Now here are the answers to last week's clues. Capital Eggs refers to the egg rolling contest that takes place every year on the White House lawn. On the Monday after Easter, thousands of children gather to roll Easter eggs with the president. This year, President Carter and his daughter Amy were on hand for the festivities. President Rutherford B. Hayes started the custom in 1878, and it has been observed ever since. Walkers Unite refers to the transit workers' strike that has thousands of New York City residents walking to work. For over a week, the city's subway and bus system has been closed down. Striking workers say they won't reopen until they receive better wages. Negotiations are continuing, but it looks as if the strike will last for some time. Meanwhile, millions of New Yorkers have had to rely on bicycles, skateboards, and even roller skates to get to work. Middle East Visitor refers to Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, who came to the United States on Monday, hoping President Carter can help him break the deadlock on the Egyptian-Israeli peace talks. The major issue is whether the 1.2 million Palestinians living in Jordan's West Bank and Gaza Strip should be allowed to rule themselves. Egypt says yes, but Israel says no. The issue was supposed to be settled by May 26th, but Sadat doesn't think there will be a breakthrough by then, since nothing has been accomplished in the 10 months of negotiations so far. Sadat wants President Carter to persuade the Israeli government to compromise on the issue.
Time for our second pop quiz. In our story on the Peruvian embassy in Cuba, we told you many Cubans want to leave the country because they are not happy with the government under President Fidel Castro. The type of government in Cuba is a democracy, a communist dictatorship, a monarchy. And the correct answer is number 2, a communist dictatorship.
When you think of art, you usually think of paintings and sculptures, but sometimes nature provides the most beautiful art of all.
This is a story about trees, special trees that when they're full grown stand under a foot tall. The Japanese are really the masters of bonsai, the art of growing dwarf trees. But Bill Valavanis is one of the few bonsai experts in the U.S. People from all over the world come to see his prize-winning trees. Believe it or not, he can make a dwarf tree from any kind of tree.
First, you select a specimen and study it for the basic form and design. Then you prune with special pruning scissors the unnecessary branches. Then we wrap copper wire around it to shape it. Then you can bend up branches to your liking. Then we put it into a fancy bonsai container, similar to this. And this will help to keep the plant dwarfed inside.
Bill has thousands of bonsai trees in his backyard, every kind imaginable. Some with flowers, others with fruit. This tree's roots are growing over a rock, and some are so small they fit right in your hand. The trees stay small because they're growing in a pot, and Bill has to constantly cut back the new branches. But Bill says growing bonsai trees is more than just gardening.
In order to get the fine, beautiful shapes, we have to include art and design. Otherwise, you get a potted tree.
What to you is the most important part, the most meaningful part of this art?
The artistic beauty of each tree. Each one is different, and they have different meanings to you. They remind you of a hill or a forest or of a mountain. And certain feelings are brought back in reminders.
Bill has been hooked on bonsai trees since he was 12 years old, and now at 28, he has an international reputation. The reason for his success? He loves these trees like a father loves his child. Bill, do you ever name your plant?
Occasionally. This tree's name is Norman, the Japanese red maple.
Why Norman?
I've got a friend in Toronto, Canada, and I named it after him.
Bill says his goal in life is to spread the art of bonsai throughout the world. For Assignment The World, I'm Lisa Rudolph. "84 years ago this week, April 6, 1896, the Olympic Games were held for the first time in modern history. The location of these games was the traditional site in Athens, Greece.
For 6 months of the year, from the end of April to the end of October, we are on daylight savings time. During this period, everyone sets their clocks ahead 1 hour, so there will be 1 more hour of daylight at the end of the day. Some people think daylight savings time should last longer than 6 months, and Congress is currently considering legislation that would change the beginning of daylight savings time from April to the last weekend in February. Those who are in favor of extending the period of daylight savings time say it will save energy because you won't have to turn the lights on so soon at night. Also, people would have more daylight after work and school for recreation during the winter months. Those opposed to changing the date say this will make the morning seem like night, and children will have to wait for school buses in the dark. They say winter mornings will be too cold if there is no sunlight. Well, what do you think? Should daylight savings time last longer than 6 months or not? Write and let us know what you think. We'd like to hear from each one of you. The fact that spring is finally here and people are outside enjoying themselves may account for our low mailbag this week. Also, many of you are enjoying a spring vacation. Only 262 letters came into our mail desk on our question of should children be bused to desegregate schools. About half of the letters we received said that they were against busing students, while 42.4% of our answers said that busing was all right. An additional 4.5% were undecided, and 2.7% felt that the choice was up to the individual. Many of the letters that opposed busing were still in favor of desegregation, but felt that busing was a poor way to achieve racial balance and equality. As John Blessinger wrote, blacks and whites should be desegregated, but not at the taxpayer's expense. If they want to use the money, they should use it to improve the schools instead. Other letters expressed fears that busing could lead to further violence, break up friendships, waste energy, or affect students' after-school activities. On the side in favor of busing, the main arguments were that busing would give people with different backgrounds the chance to meet, as well as the chance to receive a good education. Julia Davis expressed this idea best. Busing children to a different school is a good idea because you would get a better education. Schools should have a mix of races because we have to get along with each other regardless of color. My best friend is white and I am black, and we get along fine. If a school is all one color, you don't have the chance to learn about how other people are. Well, even though you may be stricken with spring fever and are reluctant to write to us, we need to have you get your letters into the mail to us as soon as possible on our issue of last week on smoking in public places and on this week's issue on daylight savings time. Many of your letters have been coming in too late to use on the air, so write to us now and send your letters and your drawings to Assignment the World, Post Office Box 21, Rochester, New York, 14601. And now it's time to get out your paper and pencils because here are the clues for next week's show. First clue is MB's turn. That's MB's turn. Second clue for next week, government collects. That's an abbreviation for government, obviously. Government collects. And finally for next week, strike three. Strike three. These are clues for events we think will happen in the coming week. Good luck.
Now it's time for the last pop quiz. In our story on the stalled Egyptian-Israeli peace talks, we told you the main issue is whether the Palestinians should be allowed to have peace talks, a new deadline, self-rule. And the correct answer is number 3, self-rule.
Did you know that when George Washington first became president, he had only one tooth left in his mouth? Of course, George had dentures, but contrary to legend, his false teeth weren't made of wood. Researchers at UCLA have found out they were made of lead, cow's teeth, carved elephant and walrus tusks, and even hippopotamus teeth. The researchers say he must have had a very difficult time talking and eating because the teeth were held in place by springs that pushed them up. One dentist says that when George talked, he probably had to talk with his mouth closed, or else his teeth would come out. And now you know why George is never smiling in any of his portraits. And that's our show for this week. From all of us here at Assignment the World, I'm Ginny Batchelor. We'll see you next week. Thank you.